Hey everybody, Merry Christmas. Here's a lovely seasonal video all about A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. And today's topic is based on examination technique. How are you going to approach the paper? And the theme of today's exam paper is the seasonal theme of fear, very Christmassy. And the work that I'm going to be going through on this paper is all based on AQA's May 2018 paper, which is based on the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come. So you can download a copy of the paper and the link is going to be in the description for you. So for anybody who's taking the examination in 2021, things are going to be a little bit different for you. So we'll just go through some of the changes for you. Paper one this year is going to consist of two separate papers. And you'll be doing one separate paper on A Christmas Carol. And if you go to my school, you're going to be doing a separate paper on An Inspector Calls. And each of those papers will be 50 minutes long. What they'll do is they'll give out your first paper of A Christmas Carol, and you have 50 minutes to answer that one. Then they will collect that in. You get a chance to stretch out your fingers and give your writing hand a break. And then they'll give out the next paper, which will probably be an Inspector Calls for you. And you have 50 minutes to answer that question. If you are interested enough, you can pause the screen and read through all the reasons that AQA have given for those changes. Actually, for those of you taking it in May 2021 or possibly June or July 2021 when the government decides, I think that might be a lot easier and more manageable for you than having to manage that big amount of nearly 2 hours to write 2 essays and wade through the examination booklet. So that's great. If you're taking the examination in 2022 or any year after that, then you'll be back to the old paper one and you'll be writing about Dickens and then Shakespeare. So sorry about that. Tough luck. So without further ado, let's get on with the paper. The first little bit of examination technique I'm going to give you is settle down, find A Christmas Carol. They kind of mash up the order, so use your index if you need to. Find A Christmas Carol, though, and just read through the extract, almost for pleasure. So what does it say? Read the following extract from Chapter 4 of A Christmas Carol and answer the question that follows. Circling question 4 and hope chapter 4 and hopefully realizing that the extract is going to come from quite near the end of the novel. Next little bit of blurb says, in this extract, Scrooge meets the ghost of Christmas yet to come. So thank you very much for telling me that. Hopefully you're remembering that's the one who looks a bit like one of the Dementors from Harry Potter or the Grim Reaper. And you're like, yeah, he's the creepy ghost. That's cool. I know what this is going to be about. And then reading through the extract using your nice little voice in your head, probably a posh gentleman who's reading the story to you. The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon his knee, for in the very air through which this spirit moved, it seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand. But for this, it would have been difficult to detach its figure from the night and separate it from the darkness by which it was surrounded. He felt that it was tall and stately when it came beside him, that its mysterious presence filled him with a solemn dread. He knew no more, for the spirit neither spoke nor moved. I'm in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come, said Scrooge. The spirit answered not, but pointed onward with its hand. You are about to show me shadows of the things that have not happened, but will happen in the time before us, Scrooge pursued. Is that so, spirit? The upper portion of the garment was contracted for an instant in its folds, as if the spirit had inclined its head. That was the only answer he received. Although well used to ghostly company by this time, Scrooge feared the silent shape so much that his legs trembled beneath him, and he found that he could hardly stand when he prepared to follow it. The spirit paused a moment, as observing his condition and giving him time to recover. But Scrooge was all the worse for this. It thrilled him with a vague, uncertain horror to know that behind the dusky shroud there were ghostly eyes intensely fixed upon him, while he, though he outstretched his own to the utmost, could see nothing but a spectral hand and one great heap of black. "Ghost of the future," he exclaimed, "I fear you more than any spectre I have seen, but as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live to be another man from what I was, I am prepared to bear you company and do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me?" The next thing you want to do after you've read through the extract is read carefully the question and make sure that you are focused on the topic that is asking you about. So this is the topic. Starting with the extract, explore how Dickens presents Scrooge's fears in A Christmas Carol. So I've highlighted that, you could circle it or underline it. Write about how Dickens presents what Scrooge is frightened of in this extract, to highlight it. And second bullet point, how Dickens presents Scrooge's fears in the novel as a whole. So I would be writing on that exam paper, fear, like really, really big, or frightened, because those are the key words. And every point we make needs to link back to the topic of fear. Okay, even the best analysis in the world, if it doesn't answer the question, there is no point. Right then, so after you have read it through nice and quickly to try and get the gist of what's going on and really highlighting the keywords in the question, the next thing you need to do is think about the first bullet point and get this extract annotated. So you should spend approximately 5 minutes annotating the extract. And when I annotated this, even though I've tried to use my neat writing so that you can read it, I still did it in about 5 minutes. So I haven't annotated everything, just the bits that I think I can use best for my essay. And even when I was going through this, I was like, oh, why didn't I highlight that? Why not that? You can't highlight everything. I'll go through what I did in 5 minutes. The first thing that struck me was in the whole extract, it contrasts with the way that Scrooge talks about Jacob Marley's ghost. So it shows what change he's overcome. Because at the beginning of Jacob Marley's ghost, he wasn't scared at all. He was going, oh, it's a bit of undigested meat. Even though Jacob Marley was throwing everything at him, the rattling chains, the face in the doorknob, the howling, everything, every ghostly trick that Jacob Marley could think of, he was thrown at Scrooge. Scrooge wasn't scared at all. But by this like third visiting ghost, or the fourth ghost that he's seen, yeah, Scrooge is scared by now. So that's somewhere that I might start. Quite a big contrast there. So straight away, the Phantom. So that's quite fearful. It's the name of a sinister ghost. It's not a friendly ghost. Remember the first two? First ghost, Christmas Past, he was a bit of a weird ghost, looked a bit like a candle, had a pointy hat to extinguish himself. He had a girl's face and a man's face, then a girl's figure and a boy's figure, and legs and arms all over the place. It was weird, but not scary. The second one looked like Santa, basically, before Coke got their hands on him. So a jolly giant, dressed in a fur-trimmed robe with his horn of plenty, scattering Christmas spirit wherever he goes. He was not scary. He had his moments when ignorance and want came up, and not really a scary ghost. This one, however, is a phantom, scary, sinister ghost. How does he approach? Adds to the effect: slowly, gravely, silently. We've got 3 adverbs there. Slowly shows that he's moving at a slow pace, obviously. Gravely, it's got that word grave inside it, which makes you think of death, but gravely also means seriously. So he's moving in a serious fashion. And then silently, that's quite sinister too. He's approaching silently. So again, why isn't he making any footsteps? It's just he's kind of floating, and that adds to this very gothic fear factor of this terrifying phantom. So Scrooge is going to be scared of that. And the ghost has tremendous power, we find out, over Scrooge. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon the knee. So it's a powerful ghost. Either it scared Scrooge so much that he's almost crumbled, or its presence is so fearful that it's almost pressed him down. When you fall on a knee, that's also supplication, so it shows that you are submissive to that person. So Scrooge is definitely in a very weakened position compared to the Phantom. Okay, and then we go on. You can see I haven't annotated this, but you could easily, the very air through which the spirit moved, it seemed to scatter gloom and misery. And again, that could make a contrast with the ghost of Christmas present, who's spreading the joy of Christmas. This one's scattering gloom and not misery. Misery seems to be better, but hey, Dickens, you know, you're a better writer than I am. And the next quotation that I've highlighted, it was shrouded in a deep black garment which concealed its head, its face, its form. I'm going to zoom in on that one as a sample paragraph to you, so I won't talk about that now. I'm going to talk about that in the paragraph in a minute. Let's go down. It left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand. So because it's mysterious, mystery creates fear in Scrooge. And we'll talk about that more when I analyse this quotation for you. Going down a little bit further, it says, its mysterious presence filled him with a solemn dread. And I definitely might zoom in on that word dread, because dread means the fear of something, that something bad is going to happen. So if you know you haven't revised for your exam and you know that you've done badly in your assessment, you might dread getting the results. You might dread that your teacher might phone your parents. Okay, so dread is the fear that something bad is going to happen. And it's a very heavy sounding word, dread, monosyllabic, and it just kind of drops in a heavy, depressing kind of way. So if Scrooge is filled with a solemn dread, you can really analyse his fear there. Things aren't going to turn out well, that's what he's fearing. We're going to go down a little bit further and have a look at some language effects that Dickens has used here. Scrooge feared the silent shape so much. So we've got that really lovely sibilant effect there, which is going with this idea of the silent ghost, this very hushed tone, which creates a really sinister mood and tone to the writing. And again, we've had Scrooge's fear being mentioned here. So because the ghost isn't saying anything, it's not giving him these answers that he wants like the other ghosts did, he's fearful because of the uncertainty that that creates. And uncertainty comes all the way through this extract. And definitely when you don't know what's going to happen in your future and you're fearful for your future and you dread your future, that is certainly going to create a sense of fear in anyone, much certainly Scrooge here. Okay, we've got more physical effects that I've annotated here. He feared the shape so much that his legs trembled beneath him. So this really, really links, doesn't it, to this bit up here about him, Scrooge bent down upon his knee. So this is really hinting that he's so afraid of this ghost, his legs are trembling and he can't physically hold his body up. And it really contrasts with quite arrogant Scrooge that met Jacob Marley's ghost back in chapter 1. He could hardly stand when he prepared to follow it. It could also suggest that this misery and gloom that the ghost is spreading is really, really pressing down on Scrooge, and that's stopping him being able to move. Okay, and I think that people, you could link that to the theme of like depression as well, that people feel like that if they are suffering from that mental health. So what have we got down here? He says down here, he tries to speak to the ghost. Ghost of the future, he exclaimed, I fear you more than any spectre I have seen. So there's the fear again. But as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live to be another man from what I was. So this really, really short phrase, I hope, he fears that he won't survive to make changes. Now, if you think about it, this ghost has been presented up here almost, as I said before, like the Grim Reaper. It's almost as if he fears that the phantom has come to take his soul, and that he's going to die before he wakes up. And Scrooge is really, really fearful that he's not going to be able to make amends. He's not going to be able to atone for everything that he has done wrong. So this tiny phrase, I hope, is quite important there, because he's kind of saying to the ghost, please let me make it through the night. I've got all these things, all these changes I want to make because I've learned so much already. Okay. We've got down here as well, I put ghost repeats the unknown future. So this is something which kind of keeps recurring, because the ghost won't respond to Scrooge because it doesn't speak, because he can't see its face. It gives a sense of uncertainty. And when you have uncertainty, that heightens fear. Scrooge wants answers. He wants clarity. He knows what the future, he wants to know definitely what the future holds for him, not what it might hold. So and he's not getting that clarity, and that's really enhancing his fear. So what I tried to do at the bottom just down here is try and almost summarize and pull together what I've learned about Scrooge's fears. And first of all, we've got quite a literal fear. Literally, he's terrified of this ghost. It looks like the Grim Reaper. It looks like death. He calls it a phantom, and it's scary. It's like a Halloween ghost. And it has so many connotations of death surrounding it. So that's what he's scared of, the scary ghost. And that really ties in with Gothic themes, which is important for your AO3, social, historical, and genre conventions, but also for AO2, you can have a look at analysing the Gothic. He's also scared, on a deeper note, that he's not going to survive the night because this ghost looks like a reaper, and he won't have the chance for redemption. He won't be able to save his soul. And then finally, he's scared of the unknown. He's scared of what's going to happen in the future and what the ghost is going to show him. And then I put structurally, you can contrast with Jacob Marley. Right, so 5 minutes to annotate all that. You might well have picked out different things from me, and that is absolutely fine, but that's what I picked out, because literally you could analyse everything in there. You don't have time, you've got 20 minutes to do the first bullet point, okay? So just pick out the bits that you think are good. What you probably want to do next in exam technique is just spend 3 minutes, or maybe a bit less than 3 minutes, just randomly writing down a little plan for your second bullet point. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But just to break things up, I'm going to model one paragraph that you could write based on something that I've annotated here. Here's one without any annotation. So if you want to pause and screen grab this before it looks messy with colours, and do, but I'm going to go straight onto this one. What I've done here is I've used a C's structure, P-E-A or P-E-E or Peter or whatever is fine. I quite like C's. It's the one that we use for English language, paper 1, question 4, where we're taking the statement apart and saying whether we agree with it or not. And I've broken it down: statement, evidence, inference, zoom in, evaluate. What I've added into the mix here is some AO3 context, which is worth 20% of your marks in literature. So 20% of your marks for your historical, social context here. So let's see how it works then. Dickens reveals Scrooge's fear in the extract when he describes the appearance of the ghost of Christmas yet to come, shrouded in a deep black garment which concealed its head, its face, its form. So I've responded to the statement, how does Dickens reveal Scrooge's fear? And I've said he does it when he describes the ghost. Then I've dropped in an embedded quotation. So it just sounds like my own writing, but the speech marks tell the examiner it's not, it's the quotation. I've gone in for some inference now, so I'm going to explain what this quotation means to me. Because the phantom does not reveal its facial features, Scrooge fears it. So I keep mentioning fear, really important to link it back to the question, as its emotions are entirely unknown. Scrooge cannot work out if the ghost is revealing what will definitely happen in the future, or what might happen if he doesn't change his ways. So that's what I can infer from that quote. This uncertainty creates fears. I haven't highlighted, that's kind of evaluation there. I've evaluated what I've written. Moreover, so moving on to some zooming in here, the word shrouded has strong connotations of death, since a corpse would be covered in a shroud before burial. This idea of death is reinforced by the garment's black colour. So I'm zooming in on black again. This is a bit of an obvious point, but hey, which is the colour of mourning. And I'm linking from that to a context point. Victorians were familiar with death due to poor sanitation and inadequate healthcare. so that means lots of people died, and took mourning rituals very seriously. I should still be purple there. Dickens also describes the phantom as looking like the Grim Reaper, a reference dating back to the 14th century, which Victorian readers would be familiar with. So we know it looks like the Grim Reaper. Would the Victorians? Yes, they would, because I've been doing my research and I know that the Grim Reaper figure's been around for about 600 years now. In Victorian times, about, I don't know, 850 years by now. My maths is bad in that situation. Many years. We've known about the Grim Reaper, thought about the Grim Reaper for many years. This evident connection between the ghost and death would certainly generate fear in Scrooge. Okay, yeah, I'm evaluating. Why would it? Because at this point in the novel, he has learnt his lesson and would be terribly afraid. So fear again, afraid, the phantom might reap his soul that same night and not allow him an extended life to atone for his past mistakes. So you can see I've gone through the C structure, I've added some context, I keep linking it back, linking it back to the statement or the question, focusing on Scrooge's fear all the time. Try and do that, guide your examiner, tell them, show them, take them by the hand and lead them through your argument and make sure they know you're answering the question. There you go. So that's a sample C's paragraph. You can't just write that and then move on to the second bullet point. You need to do 3, maybe even 4 like that. It's really similar, as I said, to that English language question 4 on paper 1. So you're arguing with the statement and you're kind of agreeing, obviously, with the statement in this literature essay. Right, let's have a think about the second bullet point now, please. So this is my spider diagram and this is my brain dump. I just went, where's the fear in the rest of the novel, and just wrote it all down round in a spider diagram, because that's what I like to do. You might want to list it and you might want to be more neat and more organised, and that's also fine. Do this plan in your exam booklet, because if you don't get through it all and then you don't cross it out, you may even pick up 1 or 2 marks for some of your ideas, because if you don't cross it out, the examiner has to read it and mark it. Okay, so maybe if you run out of time or something, it's worth having it there. If it looks a mess and you write something silly or you slang there and you don't want to mark, just put a neat cross through it, and after you put your neat cross through it, you could write plan do not mark, and then they won't even look at it, and that's also fine. So this is what I thought of. He was afraid of his unloving father, and the fact that his little sister Fan, when she comes to pick him up from his boarding school to come home, says father's so much kinder now, indicates that maybe his father was really cruel and mean in the past. So definitely that's something that we're using our inference to work out Scrooge might have been afraid of. He seemed to enjoy school when he first went back there with Ghost of Christmas Past. He saw all his friends and could name every one of his friends, so he wasn't scared of school. But when he saw them all leaving to go on their, quote, jolly holidays, he became really, really fearful. And then we see him isolated. And then we see him growing up and hiding his emotions so much more. To begin with, he was simply reading books about people who've also been lonely and isolated, such as Robinson Crusoe and Ali Baba in those books. And then this fear of isolation becomes isolation, and then he actually seems to fear other people's company. So like his own nephew Fred, he refuses to keep company with, even though Fred goes and asks him to Christmas every year before he was married and after he was married. And thinking about fear of being in company and being liked, Scrooge is also terrified of poverty. He's scared of being poor, and we see that his early relationship with his lovely fiancée Belle, and when she comes to reject Scrooge, she says, when we first got together, you said you wanted to make money so that we could afford to be married and live a nice life, but now you've become so obsessed with money. Money's become like a golden idol to you. You're so afraid of being poor that you've neglected our relationship. You neglected me. Are we ever going to get married? No, we're not, and therefore I'm leaving you. So he was afraid of being poor, so much so that he let Belle walk away from him. And in fact, this links back to the previous point, his fear of loneliness and isolation and rejection, because he's been rejected by his father and now by his fiancée. So it's almost like justifying or backing up what he believed already, that, you know, he's just a sad man who's been cast out by various people. But then leading on from the extract itself, the big things that came into my mind was his fear of becoming old alone, so having no one to look after him. And again, this does link nicely from the Belle point, because at the end of that section with Belle, do you remember we saw Belle's family, and Belle has a loving husband and so many children from the age of 18 to a little baby. And Scrooge looks at the 18-year-old, who to begin with he thinks is Belle, and he wishes that he had a daughter who could comfort him and look after him as he grew old. But of course he has no family because he rejected love so many years ago. So we get that real regret, that fear that he will have no one to look after him when he grows old. And then in chapter 4, after the bit that we were reading in the extract, we see this fear of dying alone, because if he dies alone, what will happen to him? Well, these kind of lowest of the low in society, old Joe, the rag and bone man, Mrs. Dilbert, the washerwoman, and the other two grotesque figures who strip this poor dead man's body of its silk shirt, the curtain around the bed, and of all his items, he is left with no dignity. So this indignity of dying alone because there's no one there to find your dead body and to look after you. And you can link this point, this fear of dying alone, back to the point that we've kind of talked about already, that the Victorians, because they saw so much death, because there were no cures and no vaccines and so on for all these common illnesses, and not much sanitation going on, they were so familiar with death that mourning and being held in state, properly being laid out and looked after, buried in a nice graveyard and having your grave tended, this was so important to the Victorian people. They made so much of death. Death was a real celebration, and mourning was so important to their life, that the idea that your naked body would be your naked dead body would be stripped of anything of value and just indignantly left there, and then you'd be cast into an untended grave in a high-walled, bricked-up graveyard that no one visited, is a real fear for Scrooge, and that leads on in chapter 4, and that's how chapter 4 ends, with Scrooge looking at his own gravestone in this neglected graveyard. And also Scrooge, as we mentioned before, is so afraid when he actually wakes up. He's so glad that he wakes up at the end, but he's so afraid that he's missed Christmas Day, because he's got this joy and he wants to kind of almost prank Bob Cratchit by sending him a turkey and not knowing who it's come from. And then he pranks him again by pretending he's going to fire him the next day. So he's so happy that he hasn't missed Christmas, because he can still show his new side and start atoning for his sins. And of course, Scrooge would be afraid of death, hell, purgatory, the really strongly held Christian beliefs that Victorian people had. Okay, so that's really, really important, that he doesn't suffer the same fate that Jacob Marley, his business partner, suffered, that we saw right back in chapter 1. And when we're talking about this fear of death, this links really nicely to this point. Scrooge is terrified that Tiny Tim is going to die, and he asks the ghost of Christmas present, will the boy live? And you can see when I was dumping my ideas down, I couldn't remember the quote, will the boy live, I put, and then I remembered it was child, and then actually I still wasn't really sure, but I can use that quotation because it's close enough. I think that will the child live is the correct quotation there. So he really, really fears for Tiny Tim, doesn't he? But then what we've got with Tiny Tim is the ghost of Christmas yet to come shows us that he does die in this future. And Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come shows us how Tiny Tim is laid out in state, how Bob Cratchit goes up to see him and to mourn his death. And we hear Bob Cratchit talking about the graveyard that they have Tiny Tim. And he tells Mrs. Cratchit it's a greener place it is, and we'll visit there often, he says. So this is what it should be like when someone who is so much loved passes away. He's got a big family to visit and mourn him, and to kind of be with him as his spirit is in purgatory. This idea that Tiny Tim, kind of like a little ghost waiting to go to heaven, is kind of there and appreciating his family who come to visit him with so much love in this beautiful green graveyard. And that creates a real contrast to this horrible, mashed up, messy, neglected graveyard that old Scrooge ends up in. So again, those points link up really well. Now, bearing in mind, I've only got about 20 minutes to write this section of the essay. At the moment, what I'm thinking personally is I think I'm going to ditch this bit, and I'm going to do this bit down at the bottom, the bit that leads on really nicely from the extract we've been given about the ghosts and about these fears. However, you might be happier exploring this bit, or you might have thought of something else that Scrooge fears as well, which you want to write about. There's no one right or wrong or perfect answer for this. There's so many different ways of getting to it. So I have a model second bullet point paragraph to show you now. And again, I've kind of gone with the C's approach, and I've got some context in here, but hopefully you'll notice a lack of pink in this one. I'll explain why in a minute. So in the whole of the novel, Scrooge fears dreadfully for the well-being of Tiny Tim, son of his clerk, Bob Cratchit. Scrooge was impressed with the child's resilience and cheerfulness despite his health problems and disability. And so there I've got the statement, and I've got my inference. Why is Scrooge fearful for him? Well, because he'd been impressed with him. Scrooge does not acknowledge that his paying Bob Cratchit a meagre 25 shillings, evidence, because that's a fact from chapter 1, is at the heart of the boy's health problems. Both Scrooge and the Victorian reader would easily recognise Tiny Tim's condition as rickets, a bone-softening illness caused by malnutrition, specifically lack of dairy in the diet and access to sunshine. City dwellers like the Cratchits, short on funds, could only afford to live in the most industrial and polluted areas of London, limiting Tim's access to the sun, and they might struggle to afford dairy in their diets. Scrooge asks the ghost of Christmas present, will the child live? This ghost hints that he will die if life doesn't change for him. The phantom in the extract shows Scrooge and the reader Tim's dead body and the grief of the Cratchit family, confirming Scrooge's fear. So you can see at the bottom there, I've linked it back to the statement, Scrooge's fear again, back to the statement. This is almost like a little summary and evaluative comment here. And I have got a couple of bits of evidence, but what I haven't done with the evidence, I haven't zoomed in on it, because all right, is a question. And we've got like a little statistic that Dickens gave to us, so I could zoom in on that and say it's well less than the living wage. It's not enough money to live on, but I kind of implied that here. And this one I could zoom in on that, I guess, but it's not really bringing anything to the party. And the second bullet point, you don't need to do all this language analysis. You can, if it works, you can, and that's great. What I've kind of zoomed in on, or really analysed, is this context, in context. So I've said, why has he got bendy bones? Why is he so ill? And I've kind of used that for my analysis. And my analysis has come out of the context rather than zooming in on the language here. Okay, so hopefully you can see that subtle difference between this one here on the first bullet point, where I'm really looking at the language, and this one here, where I still am being analytical, but I'm doing it in a different way by analysing what's going on in the whole novel and how that kind of links to the history. So I've got a task for you to complete them. But before we do the task, let's go through the summary. So it's a very long summary, but hopefully it just pulls together my main points. You've got 50 minutes for this exam question. When you're reading through the first time, read the blurb. Think about where the extract comes from in the novel. Read through and take in the extract, but don't worry too much about the question first time through. You should spend about 2 minutes doing all of that. Read the actual question when you get to the bottom and highlight and underline the keywords. Is it about fear? Is it about isolation? Is it about like poverty, like whatever it's about, highlight those keywords. Just spend less than a minute looking at the question, highlighting those, but writing them somewhere big so you focus. Then you're going to spend a good chunk of time, about 5 minutes, annotating the extract. Find the good language. There's always going to be more than enough in Dickens to annotate, so make the most of his fantastic language. Try and make very different points, so don't just keep highlighting where he's repeating what the ghost looks like, for example. Think about the second bullet point about the whole of the novel and just like throw down some ideas that you've got and spend about a minute probably doing that. A spider diagram bullet point for the second bullet point there, a spider diagram or something. Then you can start writing your essay, and the easiest way to write your essay is to chunk it into 2 mini essays. First bullet point, very much like English language, question 4, spend about 20 minutes writing about 3 or 4 really in-depth PEA or C's paragraphs, focusing very much on the language in that extract and linking it all back to the title about fear or whatever the topic happens to be, what you get in the summer. And then write a mini essay on the second bullet point where you're not zooming in so much on the language, but you're still using those techniques. But for your evidence, you're just summing up what happens in the story, then inferring what that means and how it links to the topic and bringing in the historical context as necessary. So what you're doing there is, in effect, 2 20-minute essays. You're talking about a minimum of about 4 sides, I would say, in the exam booklet for that. If you want to challenge yourself, or if you're just naturally very good at writing essays and you like writing fluently, you can have a go for the challenge approach, which is starting off using the language in the extract almost as a springboard. Analyze that, and then you're kind of using a peel approach. So when you get to the end of your PEA, you're kind of linking it to elsewhere in the novel. So this reminds me of another part of the novel where, and just carrying it on that way. If you do it like this, you've got the full 40 minutes, obviously, to write one big essay, which should still be a minimum, I'd say, of 4 sides in the exam booklet. But it might just have more of a kind of a drive to it, almost more of a thesis statement to it. So you're kind of following that through. I'll be honest with you, if I was doing it, I'd probably go for straightforward approach myself. And I don't see any reason why you can't get the full marks taking this 2 mini essay approach. No reason at all. But it is up to you if you like writing essays and you just kind of get into doing it that way. Okay, so that's my summary. Here's the task then, as I promised you. So I want you to have a go at writing a PEA or a C's paragraph, answering the question, how does Dickens present what Scrooge is frightened of in this extract, basing it on the extract. Please, you could have a go at using the quotation I've picked out for you. Its mysterious presence filled him with a solemn dread. I've done some analysis for you on that word dread. Okay, so so you could go from there if you wind the video back and see what I said about it. And then for the second part of your task, have a go at writing a paragraph explaining how Scrooge fears dying alone. So again, I've just talked you through that basically when I was doing my plan, so you could listen to that again. Stripped of his clothing and possessions, dumped into an untended graveyard. Have a go at writing that paragraph there. If you want to challenge yourself, do some really decent revision, get someone at home to time you for 50 minutes, sit in a darkened in a nice quiet room and do it in exam conditions and have a go at the whole paper. And I'm going to put a link to the whole paper in the description, and I'll just show you because it's not really straightforward to find. That's the link. When you click on that link, you're going to need to scroll down the page a little bit and then find this question paper, paper 1, Shakespeare and the 19th century novel, June 2018. If you're feeling really keen, you could have a look at the mark scheme as well. It's quite a complicated document. I'm not sure how much it will help you with your revision, but it might say, did you find these points? These are the kind of points you might expect. So it might be worth having a look at that and just kind of having a look at the different levels and what you're expected to achieve for each of those. So as I said earlier, a very merry Christmas. Enjoy writing about fear. If you're pleased with your work, do send it to your teacher. They'll be pleased, I'm sure, to have a little read through what you have done and to give you some tips and feedback. So see you